Hello folks, Dr. Jeffrey Smith here with my team of esteemed colleagues getting ready to dive into a topic that we could talk about forever and have a lot of fun with, and we're going to see where we land. My background is a clinical psychologist and get to practice regularly helping people try to understand a little bit more about who they are and how to live their life in a way that seems to bring passion and fulfillment to themselves. And that's what both of my team members do as well. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and then we'll come back to our topic. So Jim, you want to take it?
Hi, everybody. My name is Jim Case, and I am the creator of the Science of Transformation. It is a program that is blah, 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 blah. I got nowhere with that. I have to think on that more. Anyway. Go ahead.
All right.
I didn't...
This is Timothy McCallum. How's it going, guys? I started off as a massage therapist about 25 years ago. Noticed a tremendous amount of emotion that was held in the tissue, and became quite fascinated in exploring that a little bit more in depth. And as a result, studied some relational somatics, some psychology, got into Rolfing, and ended up landing in some neuro-emotional reprogramming through a process known as bioenergetic synchronization technique. And anyway, I do a lot of what Jeff was describing, which is just kind of seeing where people are at. And fortunately, with my licensure, I'm able to utilize touch along with some of the talking. And anyway, I never know exactly what a session is going to look like, and I read the body through applied kinesiology, and all the body's secrets seem to be available in the nervous system. Everything's held on a cellular level, and I get a kick out of walking people back into where they were originally exposed to a particular energy that seems to be dominant in their life today. We go back and find those lessons, and we'll get more into that a little bit later, but do lots of deep corrective structural body work, and I do that after I've gotten the tigers out of the woods, as it were, in the nervous system, just really seeing where people are at with energy that they're carrying, and that can change the physiology of the body instantaneously when people let go of some fight or flight response they don't even know that they're carrying. But as I said, we'll get back into that a little bit later. I'm looking forward to this, wherever we land.
Wherever we land.
Jim, did you come up with anything?
I think so. So I like the gentleman that I am here with. I started in massage. I actually have over the years done intensive training in energy and energy medicine. I most recently certified in a process called higher brain living, which created a huge catapult in the process of transformation, which also got me deeply involved into what I call the science of transformation. And from that has evolved a book and a program that I work with individuals and groups actually to stimulate the prefrontal cortex of the brain and to create a state shift that helps people to find a state of opportunity as opposed to a state of fear. And getting deeply into understanding how fear is a choice and being able to facilitate that state shift that enables people to come from that place of opportunity where they see things not from tunnel vision, but from all potential and all possibility for themselves in their own experience. So that's where my interests lie in this process, is sort of being able to talk about and make accessible the idea of transformation for people.
So our hope in sharing a little bit about our backgrounds would stimulate the listener to go, oh, that's cool, coming at this from maybe 3 legs of a tripod or something like that. We have worked together before, not necessarily in this capacity, but ultimately we're drawing from each other different thoughts and ideas that are going to take the things that we're going to challenge ourselves to have a rift about and share, both just what would be some opinions only, and some of the information will be backed by research and clinical findings and 20 plus, maybe in some cases 30 plus years of personal experience. But I hope everybody's going to strap their seatbelts on and get ready to go for a ride.
Go for a ride.
Some of the
It's going to be a good one.
tonight's topic or this afternoon's topic, depending on when you're listening to it, it's kind of timeless in some regards. So it doesn't really matter what we say about when we're doing this. But we're going to try to be open to discussing this notion of have we been here before, in that where did we come from? Did we exist in some form prior to incarnating or showing up here in our mother's bellies and then getting delivered and doing this thing we call life? So step one is, what do we know? What has our experience been? What have we surmised with regard to where do we come from? And then that would lead us to this idea of, what the heck are we doing here? What's the purpose? What's the point? Is there one? Is it random? Is it organized? Is it divine? And then ultimately that would take us to, where are we going? What's next? So we are not claiming that we have the answers to all of this. We don't. As all of you guys know, as soon as you learn something, it's only a few years later that you realize that that wasn't exactly it. And we got to be open to new ideas and understandings. So
Doesn't that in part answer a little bit of your question?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I've introduced the topic. Jim or Timothy, either one of you guys want to take a first stab at where you think we come from?
Well, I'm probably least situated in that topic, and so which makes it kind of nice, because I might be like a lot of the listeners, just open to new information, and I come at things with a little bit of some good old critical thinking, and but I do think it's uncanny, just as a pupae in this discussion, how there are children who come in at 3 years old that can play Beethoven. Where did that link come from? I don't think that there's any coincidence there. The feeling that we have when we overwhelmingly feel like we've met someone before, I don't think that that's... I kind of feel like about past lives the way I feel about UFOs. There's a lot of sightings, there's a lot of information, and it excites me, but I don't have any empirical data on it. But it absolutely makes sense for me to consider that this is a soul journey, and we're here to get lessons. And I think that we can, once we solve those lessons of our life, we attain a lot more peace and happiness. And then we get into things like epigenetics, where the energy and the plight of our predecessors is actually going into the DNA, and how the DNA is formulated for future generations. So it's a fascinating ride, and I'm open to learning whatever I can about it. But yeah.
And to that point, one of the experiences that I had doing the work that I do with is this idea of unraveling the DNA. I kind of have this more of an intuitive experience, not necessarily grounded in science, although who knows. But the idea that DNA is ultimately everything we are, everything we have been, and everything we will be is already there. And so it's essentially the potential of all that we are. And I had an experience in Peru that was quite powerful, experiencing that space of actually, it was going through a cycle of life and death, where I was in the space of pure positive energy, and I was in the space of experiencing that pure positive energy in relation to all pure positive energy, meaning that even within the energetic experience, there is some identification. So even, like in a room like this, our energies are interacting, and there's a uniqueness, there's a unique signature to our own energetic experience, and that experience as we come together creates this yielding aspect. And the transition from that pure positive energy is coming into that life form and coming into this life form, into the body. And to me, this central core is ultimately we are all sparks of, what I call it, all sparks of God. I don't have an issue with the idea of God, but I don't hold God as a concept of some being other than all of us.
Bearded guy in the clouds.
Yeah, some bearded guy in the clouds. But it's more of that understanding that it's, if you think in terms of evolution, everything is evolving. So if everything is evolving, that means whatever started this is evolving. So in the way that I look at it is this human experience is part of God's evolution. God wanted to experience this viewpoint and that viewpoint and that viewpoint and that viewpoint and that viewpoint. And so that's when you think of all of the different teachings that go on about how this is all an illusion. The illusion is in that, not that this isn't real. We're here, we're touching it, we're feeling it, we're experiencing it. But that's only within the context of time and space. It's only within the context, because you can't take this, you can't take this out of time and space and have it exist in the same form. So the idea that this energy, calling it God, the universe, universal intelligence, whatever you want to call it, has this desire for evolution. It's part of what we see in the cosmos. You can direct it to science, because science shows that, Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about that kind of stuff all the time, that evolutionary experience, the fact that our bone matter is the same stuff that stars are made of, or our cell matter is all. So there's all this connection. And what lacks for most, I think, in understanding, or the willingness to understand, is that we want to understand it in terms of this time and space reality instead of understanding it in the terms of energetic reality, which the two are not in any way really close to each other.
Yeah. Like Newtonian and quantum, not being able to find the
right, because none of it's incorrect.
Right.
It's just peace. It's just a strand. It's just a thread. And so for me, there is a huge amount of meaning in this thought of evolving, because one, it means that at the core I am that. So if I am that, then I don't have to look for it. And
right.
Part of that science is saying, "Oh, I'm not looking. I'm unveiling."
Right.
Right. So coming here is just another way to walk that path. And I don't tend to look at it as lessons and more. It's an evolution, because more and more in my experience, I find that you can't ever take a wrong step ever. There's no wrong step. It's an incorrect concept. It's an incorrect idea, because if that were true, then there would be a wrong at the end, and there never is.
So right now we're talking almost a little bit more about question 2, why are we here? Let's go back to, where did we come from? We haven't really put our finger on that yet. So, of course, there's a wide variety of different thoughts about this, and our team, we're not ascribing to any one particular. I don't think anybody here is invested that there has to be just one answer. That's just not who we are. So just for kicks and giggles, there's a book called the Urantia book that suggests that there's a planet called Palladium. It's in Orion's belt. It's the middle, what we think is a star, that's actually a galaxy, and there's a planet much like ours that has life on it, that life is perhaps a bit more advanced or intelligent, and the Bible refers to these beings as Anunnaki and Nephilim. So you can look that up in the Bible yourself. You can Google it real quickly. We're not here making up these terms. They're Old Testament entities or beings that were more superior than the humans that were here. So as one possibility, we could say that we could have been created and sent here from beings that were more advanced than us, that still could be in keeping with beings that were created from God, but maybe we weren't directly created from God. Whatever God is, him or her, or combination of both genders. So one thought is descendants of beings from Palladium. Of course, there's a lot of folks that have this idea that we were seeded from aliens from another planet. And if you look at a lot of ancient artwork, you'll see beings with large heads. You'll see beings with what appear to be space helmets. You'll see things that look like flying carpets, but they're shooting rockets. And you'll even see like effigies in the pyramids that you can see a full-on Apache helicopter. Like somebody had a vision and it's a side view of a helicopter. It's like, what's that doing on there from 5,000 years ago? So other beings, other planets, UFOs. One widely held idea is that aliens are really into gold. And they programmed us to be fascinated with gold so that we mine it and we collect it and then they come and get it. And I can't prove that there's no gold in Fort Knox, but some people have devoted their whole lives to where's the gold, and apparently it is collected and then it disappears. Gold happens to be a metal that is incredibly conductive of electricity. So if you're making circuit boards for spaceships, that would be what you want to use. And again, we're just kicking around ideas right now. I'm not tied to any of these. We're just trying to start from somewhere of where did we come from.
Well, I had you sent a couple videos a while back, and I can't remember who they were in. Who Seth
Michael
Rogen?
Tellinger?
No, was it Michael Tellinger?
Could be.
Maybe is he the guy that talks about all the energetic things and the lines and the
circles.
South African origins.
And in listening to those, the thing that struck me as an origin story is I started to contemplate the idea that we aren't the first. How do I say this?
Version?
Yeah, that actually the evolutionary process, if we want to even call it that, but that there was a time when there were these larger beings on the planet. There's too many things that show that there's something to that.
Right.
So was there the things that we've been able to identify, the age of the dinosaurs, the age of early man, the current situation, there's lots of gaps.
Yep.
And those gaps, when you think about the Aztecs and the Incas and the people that built the pyramids and the people that built these amazing structures that have no explanation other than very poor rationalization for explanation. and I want to preface this by saying I am personally, I don't go there, only because it doesn't serve anything for me, it doesn't serve anything in my own life to go, am I from aliens or not from aliens? But it was intriguing having gone through that video to have that idea come up that as we know ourselves now, so maybe in the last 1,000 years, 2,000 years, this form of human being is what's evolving because there's something about our ability to connect our rationality and our emotions that is a deeply powerful experience because it's taking thought and taking energy to a whole different place than it had been before, where maybe predecessors had a keen intelligence or a keen intuitive ability, so they could do things that we don't do as well, but there are things we do as a human species that are very different. our reasoning faculties, our ability to take thought, translate it into emotion, use that as energy to do things, but we've not learned how to utilize that energy other than to abuse ourselves.
For those listening at home, do you mind sharing a little bit about the video that you sent and what he's talking about, these circles that were in? Just paraphrase.
I guess the summary would be that there are...
Reader's Digest could be.
Yeah, there are, I think he said as many as 1 million artifacts, and they're large-scale artifacts, like football-size artifacts.
Football field?
Football field size. Patterns of rocks that have been stacked up in South Africa on the surface that appear to be collection devices for energy that radiates from the Earth. And that these...
One of them was called Michael Tellinger 2017 Sound, Resonance, Magnetics, and Reality.
Thank you.
Thanks. That's a great reference.
And that's on YouTube.
So they also tie into the pyramids, and today they tie into buildings. Some of the some of the ancient Roman structures. When you look at a circuit board and you see microchips sitting on a circuit board, they're almost identical to the ancient Roman ruins. That if you thought of the ground being the circuit board and the building itself being the microchip, it's like these objects point into the sky and radiate energy into the sky and our atmosphere, and it's just fascinating. And today our cities are developed the same way, and they're all connected by highways. So it just kind of mind blowing if you think about this. Yeah. So what was your point in wanting to draw that into the conversation, the Michael Tellinger part?
Just if I was at home and listening to this, and I wouldn't know what the jump off point is.
Oh, okay, right.
So people can research on their own and
so
watch that.
I can share this. This is that presentation that we were talking about was recorded in Sedona, and it's about the discovery of lost knowledge. He shares new information on the origins of humankind, the vanished civilizations of southern Africa, ancient advanced technology, stone circles, and other megalithic sites, and a deeper exploration of sound, resonance, frequency, magnetism, and toroidal fields. The manifestation of matter from the vacuum or the morphogenetic field, and the strange anomalies we discover on that journey. So but it's so interesting because it ties so deeply into what you were just saying, which was part of that idea of what it has it been different races, but there's so many correlations and so many things that even if you tap into Eastern culture and how it talks about how everything's connected, and then you see, I watched a video the other day about architects engineers constructing based on nature. And so like there was in China they were finding that their train, their fast train, whatever that's called, I think it was China, when it goes through a tunnel, when it comes out the other end of the tunnel, it creates a sonic boom. And they had to find a way to redo it. And so they found that modeling the train after a particular bird, because of the way the bird operates, it was the birds that dive into the water to get
pelicans.
It might be pelicans or something, but using that configuration because they're able to come from a very high place, and when they hit the water, they go through the water with making very little impact on the water, and then they come back up and go out again. And so they apparently did reconstruct this train, and by using that, they reduced dramatically the amount of sonic boom that was taking place to a level that was acceptable. But then there was all these parallels to so many other things that were just extraordinary. But this whole idea to me is fascinating because of the parallels that you see, cities acting like microchips, and the connection. Going to take a quick break. And we're back. Jim was banging on the table and he needs to stop.
So we're still kicking around this idea of where did we come from? And what the consensus so far we seem to have come up with is whatever version of human 2.0 or 20.0 or whatever it is, there has been a process some researchers and analysts would say that we have been here many, 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 many times before. Not we individually as a soul, although there are lots of folks that ascribe to that, but that there have been large populations on the planet and then wiped out, and more large populations. Greg Braden talks about certain places in South America that there's evidence of civilizations that had nuclear power, that had flushing toilets and underground sewage systems, and then just completely vanish. And they've left behind some artifacts that the best we can do is go, oh, isn't that interesting? And we stick it in a museum and somebody tries to guess at what it was for, but we're kind of like wildly off on how all of that works. So would anybody want to jump in and try to tackle the 6,000-year-old story that the Bible tells us?
Can you say bullshit?
So one of the...
I have a viewpoint, but I'm more than happy to leave that to the floor.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, somebody else can dive
So
in.
I want to touch this thing.
Yeah.
Timothy and I have been kicking this around for probably 5-6 years, at least, of our fundamental Christian background that we have,
Indoctrination.
right, that we've outgrown. Is that a fair,
I think
fair
it's
term
very
to,
fair to
to
say.
I
say
grew up
that?
Catholic. I know where you're coming from.
That when I recall watching a movie called Zeitgeist, and if you folks haven't seen it, take the time and watch it. But it lays out a very well done, systematic, hey, this story of the Bible has been told before. And not just once, but
Countless,
it's like
yeah.
on maybe the 10th iteration. And it's the same theme of this deity that was born of a virgin, that had a ministry that started at about age 30, lived for a few years, was killed, was raised again from the dead. And it's just like, what? Wait a minute. I thought that was unique to the Holy Bible, and that story's just been told one time.
When I first met Jeff, we were both still in our faith, Christian faith, and we didn't talk for a little while, and then we came back in. He invited me to be part of a think tank, and I had assumed that he was kind of where I left him, but he and I had the same evolution into critical thinking about what is, and we were right on the same page. And Zeitgeist was a really huge deal for me too, and it's pretty accurate, except for some of the tenets about Horus, and we can get into that another time. But overall, it's a good place for people to look at the history of God,
Right.
And the very first iteration of God was the sun, because it kept us warm and it grew our crops and we felt safe from predators, and everything from that honoring has led into all these others. But so what did you want to get into about the 6,000-year-old idea?
Well, yeah, that if you're willing to have an open mind, that recorded history really goes back a lot farther than what Western civilization would give credence to, and that there have been many intelligent beings that have occupied space on this planet, that for whatever reason, maybe to keep the veil over our eyes or keep us guessing, or for whatever reason, it just disappears, and then the new civilization starts over again, kind of blind and guessing its way.
Do you think that has anything to do with the matriarchal, like all the great matriarchal societies that were just absolutely about compassion and love, of course, get stomped out by the sword? Do you think that in the way that prophets get snuffed out, and when there starts to be a higher vibratory part of our getting there and understanding it, there seems to be something that quells it, and I think that's pretty fascinating, because that seems to be the case.
Well, you can certainly support that, as well as just natural disasters of meteorites slamming into the planet and putting you into a nuclear winter. And, only the rats and the cockroaches survive, and then somehow it starts up again.
Have you ever seen the show? There was a great show called After Humans.
I don't think I have.
So what they do is they each episode goes through the idea that if humans were no longer on the planet, what would happen? You know, and it goes over thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And I think it's interesting, and this is just something that occurred to me because that concept is so fresh, is we assume, maybe, in the conversation, that when we find ruins, that we automatically subscribe what's the word I want? Not rudimentary. A less than. What's the word for not smart?
Basic?
Yeah, that they're somehow underdeveloped.
Uh-huh.
They're not as
Right.
developed as we are.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But in the context of that, like what that show does, only because of the construct that they present, is we're assuming that there is a linear continuity because that's what we want to believe, as opposed to the idea that what if a certain set of ruins are actually ruins to the degree that they're ruins because it was hundreds of thousands of years since they've been here, not 50,
Right.
not 10.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're getting to see is exactly what the next influx of whatever human experience is here of this particular Earth. That as that evolution continues, they're going to see the same remnants, maybe a little bit different because we have some potentially more complex building structures and steel, but all that stuff eventually disintegrates. So it's just kind of a thought process there, but it derailed a little from where you were going about.
But the 6,000 year
6,000
deal
year.
is it's alarming, but there are a pretty large amount of Americans that and our neighbors that believe that believe that this is a 6,000 year old experience, and it's just getting into the God gaps, what we don't understand. God works in mysterious ways, but and our dating of certain materials, and it's just astounding to me that people are not taught how to think critically about these things. And I think that there are some gorgeous things in the Bible. I'm glad I grew up in a church home the way that I did. I like the accountability. I like the sense of communing. I like the intonation that we had when we would sing, right? But it doesn't make the stories true. But I like looking at the Bible in the way that Yogananda looked at the Bible, which was predominantly in looking at it as an allegory, and that there was deep mystery within the text that we miss because we're taking it literally. And he dedicated an entire book at the second coming of Christ. I don't know if you've looked into that, but the guy really cared about it. But when we're looking at the Bible from that standpoint, I can get on board. But this idea that this Puritanistic way that our country was supposedly founded, and the mass deception that has gone on and kept us dim in our spectrum of how we see the world and how we question the world, I think it's done a disservice to. I think that religion has often done a disservice to what we can learn through empirical study, and I think that is changing now in the age of information when we have access to so much more. And I think that's why there are less and less people adhering to what their grandparents had in this country. So
one of the things that's in the Bible, back to the where did we come from part of all of this, is this idea that I'm not a chapter and verse kind of guy that's able to quote chapter and verse and the concepts and principles kind of person. But there's a passage in the Bible that says that God knew us before we were fashioned in our mother's womb, which in that context means that we existed in some form before we came here. And I think for the sake of our discussion, that's really what we're trying to surmise is we didn't just show up, and this isn't our first rodeo. Would that be fair to say that there's some kind of consensus here? Not that we have to have it, but I'm just, what do you guys think about we existed before we came here, and this isn't our first rodeo?
I think it's a fair foundational place.
Yeah, I'm open to that idea. The idea that it was in the Bible and the Bible suggested it doesn't lend any credence to that.
Right, it's
notion.
just one reference, but
yeah.
it's a Western Hemisphere reference, right? Which we already know that half the world, just not in the West, does ascribe to reincarnation and believes just like
It was my understanding that reincarnation was discussed in the Bible back before Constantine got hold of it.
You want to talk about that?
I don't know a whole lot about it, so I that's as far as I can go.
Well, that's.
I'd love to get back with you.
Well, I ultimately struggle with things like the Bible because they were designed by men, written by men, through the perspective of whatever it was they were living at that time.
Yep.
And so, while there may be allegories in there and things that are of import because of the story, the translations maybe can lead to deeper lessons. So if you put the Bhagavad Gita and the Bible together, there's going to be a lot of things that correlate in that the core concepts are there. So it could be that, well, it doesn't matter what could be. The point for me is that that particular, well, not even that particular, I think all of them serve to present certain information in a way that directs people to think in a certain way.
Right.
And when you direct them to think in a certain way, you manage and control their experience.
Yeah.
And I think that's more the focus of that book than anything else. And even as you were referencing, Constantine changed it. Well, because it didn't serve him the way it was written.
Exactly.
So we don't know what it was originally written for, or why.
You don't want anybody getting any big ideas about reincarnation,
or if it was, was it the mystics and the mystics and the teachers and the healers that which were the same for all the other major tomes around that had these concepts and ideas like we do now, that tapped into universal intelligence, that were able to translate those concepts, but when it came to how to share those concepts, and I'm not, I will stop this conversation immediately from going into the idea of conspiracy theory nonsense. I don't want to go there. It's not my place. More that it was simply used as a tool to manage people.
Absolutely.
And so, as a reference point, what exists now, I think, takes so much effort to sift through that it's a waste of time, because there's too much attached to, if the Bible in and of itself was established like the Bhagavad Gita or like one of the really ancient teaching or ancient scripture type things, I think it would have more value, but it's obviously been so bastardized and so abused in its construction that it's hard to really believe much of.
Hundreds of hands over thousands of years.
Yeah, it
it's
doesn't.
A bad telephone game.
At its core, however, it proposes that we're here one time, and if you don't follow the rules, at the end of the game, you're going to wind up in a place you really don't want to be. Is that kind of the general consensus of what that story says?
Yeah.
And that's something that I've outgrown, that doesn't serve me any longer. And I'm not saying that I do know what the right answers are and have all the information. I'm just saying that story no longer serves me.
Well, in the experiences of your own life and connection to universal intelligence and the experience that you have evolved through shows you that can't be realistic or can't be real.
And
it's important to own that, because it's not this doesn't work and why doesn't it work? What's changed in your experience that this doesn't make sense anymore? It's not that For me, it doesn't even resonate as a useful tool, because there's not. I mean, without a lot of work, there's nothing you can take from that unless you understand the parables and you can use that particular story to show the idea of the larger concept. But the book in and of itself, because of the language it's written in, because of the way it's structured, King James version of this
and
thing
the contradictions.
And the contradictions.
Yeah, it's a tough one for me to draw from and to find credence in, because there was a time when I was taught that was the inerrant word, and then there's just like a little thread on the sweater, and I started pulling it. It's like, wait a minute, if that's not right, and this isn't right, okay, and that undermines, and then the next thing I know, the whole sweater is unraveled. And so it's just, for me, it's, and I know I'll get in some trouble for saying this, but I think that there are people who really need a certain kind of leadership.
Who are you going to get in trouble from?
Believe me, I've been exploring this topic for whoever can find this. There's going to be someone itching to get a hold of me. That's fine.
Well, that just sounds like an opportunity to have a great dialogue.
Absolutely,
with
absolutely.
Who wants to understand a little bit more about what it's like when you used to wear a sweater and no longer it doesn't fit you anymore.
Yeah,
and it sounds like Timothy got some new clothes.
I got some new clothes,
which is pretty cool.
But it isn't interesting when I talk to people, and I grew up in Texas on a ranch, and that was just, I went to Christian school, got kicked out of Christian school, go figure.
It was a sign.
Well, I had questions. I had a lot of questions. I didn't know that Jesus disappeared for 18 years, and there was no record of that at all. And there are some cultures that say that he traveled. He traveled to India and traveled to China.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of really cool speculation around it. But the stuff that really had traction for me spiritually, that I was craving, I couldn't find in the book, and I couldn't find in the teachings of the book. And there were no gurus or anybody that I was like, oh my gosh, how did they figure that out? Because the story of creation alone just doesn't match up with science. It just, the way it's spelled out just absolutely doesn't work that way. First of all, our sun is a second generation star. And if we talk about the beginning, and the sun and the moon are created all at the same time and all this kind of, you start looking at it and it all just really starts to come apart at the seams. And we're living in a world where people would rather believe something than to understand something. It's a lot easier. And what's interesting is that in our evolutionary biology, we actually did better when we collectively had myth, when we had things that unified us, because this idea of us and them was good for our survival. So, and I think that there's a lot of the biblical tenets that are kind of help with that. But that book to me is, we don't know who wrote it, and it's so unbelievably full of contradiction and error. It just, it's a hard place for me to have a jumping off point, because the Bible had something to say. I don't know if that's what you were getting at, is that it's kind of a flimsy, I understand for the sake of discussion, but just because the Bible postulated doesn't really, I'm interested in that question coming from you, but not because necessarily the Bible, but that could be a whole other discussion that we have about the Bible itself. But
yeah, the point of making the reference to God knew us before we were fashioned in our mother's womb, because it's from the Bible, it's kind of cool that it does suggest we existed before we came here. Doesn't really say where, this place called heaven, where, okay, well, nobody really knows exactly where that is, or how to get there, or what the lat long is, or any of that. Some would speculate that it's a frequency. It isn't anywhere other than here. It's just a different frequency, no different than a TV station that's operating on a different signal. And we, for the most part, haven't been taught how to access that. or at least a lot of people haven't. There are some people on the planet that dial into that regularly and extract great information from it. But it would be nice if we could have an idea that God is not separate from us, and that it's not like he or she is there and we're here, and there's this idea. We come. It seems like that's what we're taught, but that doesn't mean that that's what is. Still wrestling with this question of where did we come from? The Mormons believe that every time a new star is born, there's a new soul that's born. Doesn't say how or where that energy is coming from, but wouldn't it be interesting to think that souls are being birthed or created, and that we are probably not a 1-to-1 ratio, meaning that the bodysuit that I'm wearing right now, some texts suggest I'm actually only 20% of my true self sitting here right now, and that other 80% could actually then further be split up into being in other dimensions, or being home, getting recharged wherever home is, and refreshed and restored. Some texts suggest that it's like a card game, and you're like anteing. How much am I really going to be into this incarnation? How much am I willing to actually be there? And just what a concept that it isn't an all-in kind of game, that you really couldn't be all here. There's just the idea of your main connection still has to be grounded to wherever this better place is, in that it's not so full of conflict. And again, I'm not trying to prove that. It's just an idea.
I actually want to turn the table of your question, and I'm very curious to ask you why it matters.
It doesn't. It doesn't. It
Well,
really
you
doesn't.
seem to have a passion for it, so I'm curious what drives the passion for you to desire that understanding.
I find that a lot of people get caught up in things as if it really matters. And when you can't prove something, it's almost like this big, gigantic distraction. Timothy and I were having a discussion last night with a gentleman about, is the earth round or is the earth flat?
Flat earthers, yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of great info out there that you really can't support one over the other. It's
true.
not provable. It just isn't provable.
Watched some of that stuff.
Yeah, and it's just like, but in the end, does it change your life? Does it change it?
Right.
I'm not an astronaut. You're not an astronaut. And even if you were an astronaut, okay, you still go out and have this experience, and it's like, wow, it looks like it's round, but I don't know if it is or not.
It's so fascinating you referenced that, because I literally, day before yesterday, was watching a video about it, because it struck my interest, but it was an investigative report on Vice. They were looking at the flat earther movement, and they were actually talking to individuals about it. In the end, their whole thing was no different than much of anyone else, is that there's a lot of unanswered questions and stuff doesn't make sense. And this helps us to make better sense of realizing we come from something greater. We don't understand what it is. We don't understand why it is, but we have this sense of it. And so they go this flat earth route as a way of giving them a community of like-mindedness that brings them together to talk about these deep concepts, and to get into the where are we from and why are we here, and is this a game and is it not, and all that kind of stuff. And it's just so fascinating that it's coming up in this conversation. So.
I'd love to keep going with your question of why does it matter? Well, if people believe that we do come from a place, it's probably the same place. Could be different places if you get back to the whole alien possibility of greens and grays and other types. But even that goes back to a common point of origin, that there had to be a beginning of something somewhere. And however many versions or iterations later, here we are. But we're a family. And so if we go back to this, even though you live in Africa and I'm here and we've been at war with each other, daggone it, we're brothers and sisters. And we have a common home. And let's stop the doggone fighting. And okay, you're a Christian, I'm a Muslim. That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. We're brothers and sisters. Let's stop shooting each other, because we're from the same place. But it's as if there's this veil that keeps us from because we can't see it. You can't drive there tomorrow. that then somehow we get into this idea that you're separate from me and we don't believe the same thing, so I need to kill you because we don't have the same beliefs. And I know that's an oversimplified version, but
Not really.
it really comes down to that.
Isn't that ultimately addressing the why we're here?
Yeah, probably. But
I mean, it's saying, you know, the idea of that. Did we talk about this? The co-creative idea, the idea that we are here co-creating the experience, and,
right.
and that the reason that that's so is because as I have desire, I send energy out into my world that says this is what I want to manifest. This is what I want to create. This is what I want to see, and you happen to have a resonance with that. So that resonance yields with my resonance, and we come together in a new energy that's bigger and better and stronger, or more than the individual energies, which is that we're all connected thing, but that all of this is all cooperative components to that execution. That's why there's no limitation on what you can create. There's no limitation on what you can have and what you can do, because there's so many cooperative components out there, and it's all cooperative components, even if it doesn't look like. So if it's the conflict between Arabs and Muslims or Arabs and Jews, and that conflict in and of itself is a cooperative component, because it's driving the people who are most affected by it to find bigger, to find a larger place, to learn how to expand themselves. But it also creates, in its co-creative effort, all the people who are peripheral now get the opportunity to sit back. I mean, our current situation with Trump is a perfect example of that. We all have now the ability to step back from what we think we know and say, is there something different? Am I missing something? You know, I had a conversation with my brother. At one point. It actually wasn't a conversation I wanted to have, but he brought up Trump and that situation. And I said, you know, I actually sat and thought about this for a while, because what I realized is that over the course of my life, I don't recall that any person sitting in that position ever had any impact on any decision I've made in my life. None. I honestly could not go back through my life and say, because he was president, I chose to do that. Never. So why am I wasting my energy on it? That's not my reality. That's his reality and somebody else's reality. And if I'm a cooperative component of that reality, then it becomes an interface. It becomes an engagement. But if there is no cooperative component, like what brought us together, if there's no cooperative component, there's no reason to be together. There's no reason to come together. There's no reason for our worlds to ever connect. And I mean, you and I connected 5 years ago, and then we reconnected a couple years after that, and then we didn't connect for a few more years, and then out of nowhere, our worlds are back together again. And I met you once, you know, and here we are, wanting to bring our collectiveness together and co-create something really extraordinary. And I think that that's true of every single person and every single experience, and that as long as we can allow for that, the changes that occur, move consciousness forward, move energy forward, move expansion, you know, and sorry, I get carried away.
Where did you go when you got carried away?
I go up into these pictures and ideas and thoughts.
So you were talking about an unveiling occurring, and that seems sort of organic to what we're trying to do here, is to figure out how to lift this veil of suffering and of judgment and of us and them, you know. And I think that's a really powerful intention for part of what we're going to be doing here, is figuring out what that is and why we're so addicted to that level of suffering. I think that goes back to our primal brain. You could probably speak more to that, but the sameness. I think we continually do things because there's an old part of our brain that says, wait a minute, it sucked. Like emotionally we were totally distraught. It's not really thinking that, but it's saying it doesn't matter what the turmoil was yesterday. we're living and breathing today as a result of our choices yesterday, and that's an imprint. And so I think that there's a part of us that wants to go unchecked to just be able to be here tomorrow. And this higher part of our consciousness. Let me ask you something. Do you know roughly when we began to have the prefrontal cortex? Because that's the newest part of our brain, right? So do we know about how long ago that was that started to develop?
I could look it up,
Okay.
but I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
I know there is in the original development of the Hybrid Living Program, it was structured as that we are moving into the sixth epoch, and that each one had a very specific tone, and that and that the evolution of those also incorporated the evolution of the human species, and so that over all of those epochs there was originally the amygdala and the survival brain, and then another layer and another layer and another layer, and so the prefrontal cortex is just the most recent emergence. But I think that goes back, if I remember correctly, I mean, it goes back to at least to Neanderthal, because this was developed, where prior to that this was not developed in this Homo sapien lineage.
Right.
Because we're not really sure on the other.
And for the geeks at home, what is the purpose of the prefrontal cortex? And I think that plays into where we're going, right? And what understanding that.
As I understand it, it's a center for the highest level of creativity, problem solving, purpose, passion, and I'm sure there's lots more to it. But as it relates to what I do, it stimulates. In my experience, it stimulates the otherness of who we are. So that part of us that, what I would call the observer, it stimulates that experience that allows you to view events as objects. That through the observer, everything you see is an object in the field of your awareness. You're an object in the field. You're an object in the field. Emotions are an object in the field that you can. Through being in the observer, you can have it, you can experience it, but you can also not become attached to it.
Right.
And so it becomes something that's where that goes from that shifting from fear into opportunity. That here is where all opportunity exists, that you can tap into. But I think it also has. I don't think it's limited. I think it's more that idea that it opens the door to universal mind, on different levels too, because you have mass consciousness, and then beyond that, universal mind and universal intelligence, which is a whole different animal than mass consciousness.
And what percentage of our prefrontal cortex do most humans operate in?
My understanding is that 10% or less of the brain's potential is actualized.
Okay. And even less than that for the specific.
And you probably are more qualified to address that than I am, but
That's the common consensus. Another spin on that I find equally interesting is, of the total mind, that our best consciousness researchers tell us that only 18% of it is what we would call conscious. The other two parts being subconscious and unconscious, of which, if you think about just being alert, aware of what your name is, how old you are, all the data, where you live, that would be my conscious awareness. Subconscious awareness is the intuitive dream state, daydream state, and then the unconscious mind are instincts, urges, impulses, genetics, memetics, social conditioning. But that's actually what's running our show. It's that 82% that's actually running the show. When our dreams convey to us themes that we're struggling with, the subconscious mind serves as the bridge between the unconscious and the conscious mind. A lot of folks believe that really get into this, that issues that we're dealing with today that we're conscious of, like, oh, I'm aware of this problem that I need to take care of, actually started probably 6 months to a year ago in the subconscious, unconscious mind, and then all of a sudden the light comes on and we think that we just thought of it. And most people believe that they're 100% conscious. And it's just fascinating if you actually go, no, it's just a fifth at best.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's part of what transformation and about evolution or about becoming enlightened is changing the ratio of unconscious to conscious. I tell this to my clients all the time, is that the thing that's so incredible about the process is that you, through shifting out of that fear-based experience and not living in that energy, your vibration increases. And because your vibration increases, anything that's existing below the conscious threshold that doesn't resonate to that has to become conscious. It has to. It's physics. It has to move, because it no longer resonates to the vibration that you carry within your being. That's when enlightenment begins to happen, because you begin to take all of that debris, bring it to the conscious level, and go, oh, now it's an object in the field of my awareness. Mm-hmm. That in and of itself is a process of creation. That in and of itself is a process of manifestation. And so when you bring it up and you go and you look at it in the light of time and space and go, doesn't make any sense. Why am I doing that? Or you go, wow. Because for many, many people, their fear is that what they're going to learn is some horrible truth about themselves, like they weren't present for. And you're like, but wait, you can't become somebody else. That's a whole other topic. Walk-ins and all that stuff. I haven't heard that term in years. But the idea that, to what you were saying, is that it's bringing that stuff, whatever you do. And I think it's true regardless of whether you're focused into a specific program. I think that's what we're walking through life doing, is stimulating this stuff and trying to pay attention. Mm-hmm. Trying to, we aren't trained to
And
pay
when you
attention.
say pay attention, are we also talking loosely about just basic mindfulness, right? Just being
present.
Yeah.
In your own experience. Yeah.
And isn't it interesting, with all the people that we have worked with, how few people have that knowledge of just how to drop in, how to breathe, how to sense what's happening in the body, and to be aware and acknowledge a particular emotion that's coming up. Most people that I work with, they know that something's off, they know they're stressed, they know they're pissed about something, but there's something more vulnerable happening, and there's not a way that most people are, and I think this goes to the unveiling. I think it's important that people become aware of what they're experiencing and just have mindfulness, have time where they sit and breathe and quiet the busy brain.
So let's tag that back to the where we come from part. And what we're talking about right now, what we never really defined in the beginning, is this idea that we're not talking about our bodies. We're really talking about that part of us that can actually be measured at the moment of death on a table that has a scale on it, that there is shortly, we're talking about fractions of seconds after the moment of death, the body is less weight than it was when it was breathing. And electricity alone wouldn't account for the weight difference. Although electrical energy can be measured, there's actually something else.
In the way that gasoline weighs more than water because of the kinetic energy it's got. That potential is there. So, but yeah, it's pretty fascinating. What is it, like 28 grams or something like that? 8 grams? I don't know.
It's definitely measurable.
Yeah. And
that begs the question of, well, what
is
it?
Where does it go?
And, yeah, exactly. And in a lot of the near-death experience research, that folks that have been on the operating table and they were clinically dead have come back to talk about their experience of observing the process of being operated on and going to the white light and seeing the tunnel and being greeted. And there's been so many books and researchers that have again spent their whole life dictating and describing and noting all these experiences, that what we're doing, what we're really talking about, the where did we come from part would be, the words that we use to describe that would be a soul, a spirit, your prana, your chi. I'm sure there are more terms that Timothy and Jim could add into this, but that's really what we're talking about, is that part of us that transcends the body and the mind. It's interesting to talk about the anatomy of the brain, and definitely that's needed by the soul spirit to create what we call mind, but that's really not who we really are. But maybe that's the language that you speak or the culture you're brought up in. And
but at the same time, the prefrontal cortex, without it, we may not be having anything near this.
Well,
this
it's like your vocal cords.
Exactly.
Without those,
yeah,
you're just making funny sounds.
I was going to say something to the last thing you said, but that derailed it, and I can't remember what it was now.
Yeah.
So did we ramble on enough about we really don't know where we come from, but none of us have actually at this point in our conversation said, well, this is what makes most sense to me. So we've been at this a little bit more than an hour, and maybe it would be time to be bold and just kind of put it out there. What makes most sense to you?
Well, go ahead.
I'm absolutely okay with not knowing. I've got crazy peace around that. I have more peace in not knowing that than believing something on insufficient evidence from an ancient book. I'm quite all right with just staring at the stars, knowing that I am those stars, literally, and not understanding, not even beginning to understand the distances between the stars. And all that mystery makes it magic for me. And so I have tremendous joy and gratitude and peace on a daily basis at the splendor that I get to be here at all. And I each day spend time going deep in deep gratitude for being able to taste and to feel, even if my body is rebelling or I've got some illness or something that I'm sorting through. The fact I can just take that mindfulness and just be grateful that I get to be here at all. And what I like to do oftentimes is I like to imagine if I'm working through something, I like to imagine all the great men in my lineage, going back as many thousands of generations as it would take, but just sitting with those guys and just sitting in whatever my question is, and just because I'm holding that torch for all that DNA going on for all that time. I'm that expression of that right now. And so I like to just open myself up and see ancestrally what comes through. And I had some plant medicine in the Andes that helped me with that on the 1-year anniversary of my father's passing. That showed me a lot. And there was a lot of ancestral input coming from that. And so all that to say is there's things that light me up, and a lot of it we just at this point can't know. And can we be at peace at that with that notion? And I am absolutely at peace. I have great peace not knowing where I came from. And
I would have to concur that I don't. It's almost as though it's somewhat of a foregone conclusion in my thought process. Meaning, I don't give it a whole lot of energy because there is a strength for me in the trust and faith of how I live life and what I experience through that process that tells me there's more. Whether I comprehend it through my eyes, ears, nose, and throat, I could care less. I experience it. I experience it viscerally. I experience it energetically in my entire body. Those moments of profound clarity are not mental concepts. They're things that rifle through my entire being. And to your point, one of the things that I think is absolutely fascinating about the generational aspect is I think it's directly correlated to the DNA.
Big time.
And I do believe that what I execute in my experience, what I learn, what I grow, and I saw this happening with clients going through the Hard Brain Living program, was they were unraveling generations of crap, and the burden of that was profound. But when they were able to feel that in their experience and let it go, the change was just extraordinary, because it's like it literally, to what I was saying before about you can't be somebody else, it's almost like you do, but not really. You just all of a sudden reclaim a whole chunk of power, a whole chunk of energy that you've been separated from because of these long-standing, blah 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 belief systems. But to the question for me is, this is something that I think this is my existential issue. I don't want to call it an issue. My existential
Opportunity.
Opportunity. There you go. Because through my own process, through the work that I've done, I see that I can't get you there. I can't get you there. I can get me there. I'm the only person I can get there, and I can share what I understand. I can talk about what I've seen, but if you're not there, it doesn't make any difference. Because you can't have my experience. You can only have your experience. And again, through the work with Science of Transformation, it's so powerful to watch someone go into themselves and find that energy and bring it forward, because I can't do that. It's not in my path. I don't have any authority in their energetic space. I have the agreement for them to allow me to facilitate their space, and I know I do that well, which means that I can amplify their energy. I can make their energy more available to them, and then they can go, oh, I didn't realize that was there. And they bring it up.
And
that's fucking awesome.
And that to me is a lesson. And we were talking earlier when I was speaking about lessons, and you said you didn't really see it as a lesson. But that epiphany that you're talking about is precisely what I'm speaking to when I talk about lessons.
Yeah.
Is this is the way I did it, and here's some new information. Here's another way it can be. This is how it resonates, and now I'm in a new standing as a result. So.
And that standing carries a vibration that impacts every person that you come in contact with.
It raises the vibration.
That's how consciousness changes.
Absolutely.
That's how. But it's got to start here. I struggle when we were talking about earlier on this idea of people suffering and people going through, and how much suffering there is in the world, and that's a real challenge for me, because I don't see any of it as wrong. I don't see any of it as
What's
bad.
a challenge for you?
That I don't have a need to save the world. I don't have the need to I have the need to make my world a better place, and that world will echo out however it does. I don't have any control over that other than how I express my energy. And this, at some point, could be a whole different conversation, because this takes me down the rabbit hole so freaking fast, it's not even funny. Only because I don't get it. I know we're all connected, but I don't get this idea of I want to do something that makes the world a better place. Like, I don't even know if that makes sense.
It doesn't, because of what you've chosen to do in service for others.
But in my experience, I don't think of it in terms of relieving people of their suffering. I don't think of it in terms of they're in a worse place than I am.
Let's do this in another conversation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I
Getting back to the why are we here piece. Okay.
Way to keep us anchored,
I'm
Jeff.
gonna
Sorry,
try to-
I'm going to keep banging that table until...
We seem to, as a group tonight, if you go back and look at the things that we've talked about, are more comfortable with the second question of why are we here, trying to make meaning out of that. And one of the things that I've always challenged myself to do, which I'm asking you guys to join me, is to be bold And to be able to just, you don't have to be right. It's not about being right, but to be bold enough to say, this is what makes most sense to me. Mm-hmm. Even if it was, I think that rabbit on the Lucky Charms box is actually God, and somehow if you eat 2 moons and a heart and a clover, that
so you want us
opens
to
up
take
your
a stab
eyes to where we came from. Yeah, I do. Okay. I want to take a stab to just let other people be comfortable of, you can talk about this, and even if it sounds crazy, it's okay. It's just ideas.
Are you okay with someone not knowing?
Oh, I totally am.
Okay.
But I don't know if we end there, that we've really stimulated.
But we don't have to end there, but I could end there.
Oh, yeah.
If that's what's most,
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Because then I'd just be, inauthentically sort of postulating about this.
So here's why, in answering Jim's question, apparently it does matter to me to have an answer to that. And I was just trying to think of an analogy, like if for some reason we wound up in North Korea, and you came there from Mexico, and I came there from the United States, and I told the people, hey, I'm from the United States, and I demand to go to the U.S. Embassy. And I know that by being from the United States, my path back home is probably going to be a little easier than yours because of just the more sophisticated nature of the agreements with and the strength of our country and blah, blah, blah. So kind of knowing that I'm from the USA and it's a powerful country and there are means in place to help take care of me, it makes me feel more comfortable to go travel the world. So I don't know if you can work with that analogy. If I kind of know where I came from, being in a difficult situation makes it easier for me to do this thing.
I'd rather be a Mexican in North Korea than an American. Damn sure.
Yeah, maybe it's a bad analogy as far as the specific countries. But you know what I'm saying? It's wherever you are on the planet, you got the resources of where you came from that can help you deal with where you are. So if we go with that as an idea that...
we're not going there.
A great example I could share would be Dr. Eben Alexander's work in his book called Heaven is for Real. So this guy was a staunch atheist his entire life, and he's one of the most esteemed surgeon, on the planet. And he contracted viral meningitis, which put him in a coma, and all of his colleagues said, this guy's going to die. It's not even worth putting him on life support. But his family wasn't down with that, so they wanted to try all means necessary. And he was like in a coma for 30 days. Mm-hmm. And for most people, even if you are revived from that, you're a vegetable and you stay in a coma state for the rest of your life. Well, this guy came out of the coma and had regained complete functionality of his mind, and he wrote a book called Heaven is for Real from a former atheist. So he had an experience. It's very well documented, and now his life's mission is, I'm going to go around and talk about, I freaking know that there is an afterlife. Now, we use the term heaven just because it connotes some idea of a place, but you could really call it anything.
Did you read the book?
Oh, yeah. It's an awesome book. I highly recommend it.
Do we maintain this form?
Well, that's debatable, but it's almost...
in his book, in his account of heaven.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's enough that you could recognize somebody for the sake of recognition. But then again, you come back and you have another life and you get there and that's your new form. So it's almost like there's a life, there's an afterlife, the next life, and that changes. So, but we're a little bit off topic, but it's a great question. So just to come up with this notion that there is a frequency, a vibration, a dimension that we come from, and we take on these bodily forms and the personalities that go along with it, and we come here and have the experiences that a lot of the books and experts on this say that most of this was planned. There are some key experiences that we're here to have that help us understand the human experience from all perspectives, and that these experiences help us be more compassionate, more understanding, more loving, mostly of and to ourselves. And then we have them. We come here, we have them, we go back, we get debriefed, we get refreshed, restored, we make new agreements with our soul group, or however you want to look at that. Our spirit guides or guardian angels interact with us. God interacts with us on these sequential experiences that we're having. I can't prove that, but nobody in the listening audience can disprove it. So my opinion is equal to others. Being that I get to do this every day and talk about it, and maybe my opinion might be what you'd call an educated opinion, but it's still just an opinion. It just makes more sense, and that's where I was trying to start from at the beginning of our podcast today. Is hey, we can't prove any of this, but what makes more sense? Using the Bible again as a reference point of something that we've been familiar with. There's a scripture that says that God's faithful to complete the good work that He started in us. And so that has stuck with me for so long. But if you and I, if we all went to a bunch of retirement homes, would there be anybody that's within a couple days of their passing that we could say, that's an example of God's finished work? I mean, how many would we have to visit to say, in one lifetime, this person went from start to finish, and that's it? Right? I mean, it's like, what, maybe Mother Teresa, maybe Gandhi. I mean, there's probably a handful of people on the planet that we would say, yes, that's an example of God's finished work. But I know I'm not an example of, in one lifetime, of God's finished work. I'm going to have to be here a few more times to help me not desire the things that take from other people, or the selfish natures that I have, or the F-bombs that I drop on occasion, or things like that. But so it makes most sense to me that we need to be here a few more times, a lot more times, to evolve, to become enlightened, and to share love and treat our brothers and sisters kindly, and put our guns away, that sort of thing. But I like the idea that there is a place that we came from, that we return to, and that we keep this whole thing going, and that we're open to growing and being more compassionate and understanding. Don't care what we call it. A lot of books refer to it as the life between lives, a place that we have life between lives. There's a place in the Bible that calls it Abraham's bosom. There's lots of names for it, but it's just a name. But think of it as an energy place that you resonate and you vibrate and get healed and grow and plan. And it's fascinating. So it was important, I think, that we at least put all this out on the table to try to get an understanding of why and how we're living our life now based on where we came from. Because it kind of does matter to... remember, isn't there like some comedian that did a joke about Ronald Reagan? He's like, hi, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And it's kind of funny because you don't think of the government going anywhere and like helping. So it kind of does matter where the person's from with regard to what their intentions are and what they're doing here in that way. I'm going to shut up.
I think it's possible to have intention and compassion and purity without knowing.
Well, clearly it is, because none of us do. It's just a guess.
And the idea of where we come from is titillating, but for me, I think you were speaking to it earlier, Jim, that it occupies a certain amount of bandwidth that to me could be used for, and I love getting existential. I'll go as far as you want to go into whatever, but I've thought about this long and hard, and I'm okay with accepting the idea that we can't know, and we can hope that we came from something in Abraham's bosom or whatever, whatever feels good and whatever mommy taught us or whatever our demographics allowed for. But it's a similar kind of teaching throughout, and I'm going to continue being okay with not knowing where and having like crazy peace about that. And What about you? You okay with knowing or not knowing, or you?
Well, I think for me, it comes down to part of it is language, is the challenge of language, because as we talk about these things, there are attributions that are made that are strictly from what I've learned, what I know, what I think I've read, what I think I understand. And none of that matters. None of it has anything to do with where we came from. That's the human experience, expressing the human experience, living the human experience, which is freaking awesome. But I don't think it addresses in any way, shape, or form what we come from and what we go to. And I don't know that there is any coming from or going to. I don't know that I think that it ever ended. I don't know that I think it ever began. This little meat sack is going to go away at some point.
Right.
And I'm going to enjoy the hell out of it while I'm here.
Yeah.
But I don't have a sense of non-continuity. So I don't need to look for where I'm coming from, because I don't feel like I started somewhere different. I feel like I'm in continuity the whole time. You know, there's an expression that I came across a little while back that I found fascinating. I use a lot with clients because it helps them to differentiate the ego shell from the observer, from that larger part of ourselves. And that is that there is a voice that you've listened to your entire life that's never changed. From as long as you can remember, that same voice is the same voice that talks in your head all the time. Mm-hmm. And then there is the voice that is the ego, that's driven by the human experience, which is very different from the voice that you hear and have heard your whole life. All the conversations that you had with yourself. Yeah. That over time, there is that voice is the observer. That voice is the source of the transcendent self, because that is the higher. That to me, that is the continuity. That is all of the expressions of whatever I ultimately am are happening simultaneously. So all of that information all that energy is flowing, and it's continuous. It never ended. It never started. So there is no question there for me. There is no, I don't live in a space of wondering. I feel like I'm in continuity. So it doesn't.
Me too.
Yeah, it doesn't ever. It's kind of like, that's really not. It's sort of a non-event.
I think if I thought there was an opportunity to know, it would. I just don't see any plausible way to just go, oh, okay, we just solved that. We just figured that thing out. So I'm in a lot of peace and harmony about the fact that I get to be here and I get to be with you guys, and we get to figure out some ways to lift the veil and try to help some folks out. But
But that is the if you look at the stories of the masters, the ascended masters are the ones who see it. They completely experience that continuity and recognize the distinct difference between what it is to be human and what it is to be divine, and that they are not. I don't know where to go with that, but that they're not mutually exclusive, and they're different. And the ones that ascend all the way leave the planet, but they leave the planet consciously rather than unconsciously. They go, oh, cool. I don't have to stay here. I can go back and play there. I can go jump into this continuity. I can go jump into that. I can go anywhere.
That could be an interesting podcast on its own.
That to me is like that you could go there. Mine, yeah. Does that answer the question? Does that give an answer to the question?
Yeah. As you were sharing with us, it reminded me that when you do that dream analysis work, it's interesting that in a dream, it just starts. You're just in the dream,
right?
And to me,
and you don't question it,
right?
You're not like, how did I get here?
Right?
Yeah. You're just like, okay.
But yet there is a host mind that's having that dream,
right?
And maybe that's an analogy of what our lives are like.
I like that.
We're just here, and then we're not.
Yeah.
But yet there is a host somewhere having that experience, doing that, and it seems very real. Some of the reason...
That's part of that continuity idea. What if what's true is that sleep is where we follow other continuity? What if sleep is actually the time that the larger part of us spends exploring all those other places, and the bleed through are the dreams?
Absolutely.
That resonates.
Yeah.
That does.
That's actually referred to in the book that I'm reading now called Hacking the Afterlife, that exact concept. It's pretty neat.
Yeah.
Some of the reason why I find it interesting and maybe even important to try to answer the question of where do we come from is when I'm doing the afterlife connection therapy that I've started doing in the last year or two, and past life reviews, but more in the afterlife connection. I'm able to have people go into a mild trance and using the bilateral stimulation, and if they're wanting to connect with a departed relative, I'm asking them to go find them. And I'm thinking of several sessions I've done in just the past week where mom is in a garden picking flowers, and my patient is joining her in this place, and it's very descriptive. And her younger brother is there with her mom, her twin brother that also died as a kid, and she's actually having this experience and describing it just like a real place. And she's having emotion that goes along with this. And it's like, so whether that's in her mind or she's connecting to source, or I don't know what it is, but and she has tears coming down her eyes. I have tears coming down my eyes, because it's like we just touched something sacred and holy and divine and healing, powerfully healing. And it wasn't in my office. I mean, we both left and kind of went to this wherever it was.
I love that we all know what that feels like.
We all know where it is.
That we get to, and we all hit it from such different angles, but we all get there in our own way. And you didn't, from what I understand, I don't mean to speculate, but you didn't have a guru telling you when you started off in your psychology, you had no idea you were going to land where you just kept refreshing and opening and refreshing. I'm sure the same for you, same for me. But it's so beautiful to me that a big part, and I think there's a lot of clarity in this discussion today for me, is that there's a kindred spirit of what we're here for and what we've learned and what we want to bring. And I look forward to figuring out ways to do that in big ways, helping folks out.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I'd like to say thank you for
instigating
and just being so curious about life, and I called you Silverback back when we were doing when we were doing the think tank, but I really appreciate your vision and your lust for life and how to get the most out of it. So thanks for putting this together.
You bet. Thanks for hosting us and having all the great questions and
absolutely
dialogue.
And I look forward to our next one, whatever we sit with over the next week, and figure out what's next.
Yeah,
there's many pieces to this.
Yeah.
Well, it was really a good, this to me was a good, as much as the questions initially I kind of went, why is he going there? Because it really forced us to clarify ourselves, which we talked about before the recording. We've established just in this dialogue a very clear dynamic of, which is only the beginning.
So much
which
clearer.
is only the beginning of the dynamic, but it's awesome because it's
for our listeners, if we continue on with the where did we come from, which we'll probably leave that question for the most part now and delve more into the why are we here, and at some point
we'll keep you posted.
Yeah, track into the next. But the why are we here question, that's going to take many visits from a couple different angles or many different angles, and each of us will get to experience our expertise and our own experiences of what our conjecture is about that. And it'll be fun because we anticipate having some guest speakers come and join us, and that'll be fun to share with everybody as well.
Cool.
Shall we call it a wrap?
I think so.
Go ahead.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thanks for listening.
Sweet.